Everyone is watching oil. Every time crude moves a few dollars, it becomes global news. Analysts panic, headlines scream about the $100 barrel. Fair enough, oil is important. Another problem is quietly building behind the scenes, and it is happening in the most ordinary things around you. The plastic bottle in your hand, the aluminum can in your fridge, even the packaging around your food. This is not just an energy story anymore. It is now material story, and the center of that story is once again the Strait of Hormuz, a very narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman. About 1/5 of the world's oil passes through it every single day, around 20 million barrels. But oil is only part of the cargo moving through that route. The Gulf region also produces huge amounts of plastics, petrochemicals, aluminum, and fertilizers, the plastic ingredients that industries depend on. So when tensions rise around the Strait of Hormuz, it doesn't just shake oil markets, it shakes the entire supply chain. Let's start with plastic. Plastic might look cheap, disposable even, but modern life runs on it. Phones, cars, medical equipment, food packaging, electronics, construction materials. Plastic is everywhere. Two of the most widely used plastics are polyethylene and polypropylene. They come from petrochemicals that start with crude oil. Oil becomes naphtha. Naphtha becomes plastic resins. Plastic resins become everything from grocery bags to hospital syringes. Now here is the interesting part. Since tensions escalated in March 2026, prices for these plastics have jumped by more than $200 per ton in several Asian markets. Suppliers have also started issuing something called force measure, a legal phrase that basically means we cannot promise deliveries anymore. In simple terms, factories that depend on these materials suddenly don't know if their next shipment will arrive on time. And when supply becomes uncertain, prices rise, which means the cost of everyday items quietly creeps up. Not exactly the kind of drama that makes headlines, but it definitely shows up on receipts. Now let's talk about aluminium. Aluminium is one of the most widely used metals in the world. Aircraft frames, soda cans, smartphones, solar panels, power cables. The Middle East produces roughly 9% of global primary aluminium. Major smelters operate in countries like Qatar and Bahrain. When shipments from these regions slow down, global supply tightens quickly. This week, aluminium prices touched about $3,544 per ton. That is roughly 10% jump in just 7 days. At the same time, the global aluminium deficit has widened around 1.4 million tons, the largest gap since 2019. And while manufacturers worry about aluminium, investors are doing something very predictable. They are buying gold. So one metal is becoming scarce for factories, another is becoming expensive because investors want safety. The global economy works in funny ways, but the real shock in this story is shipping. Moving goods across the world has suddenly become far more expensive. War risk insurance for a single cargo ship used to cost around $10,000. Recently, some voyages have seen insurance costs jump to as high as $500,000. Yes, from $10,000 to $500,000. Shipping companies obviously prefer not to pay that. So many vessels are avoiding risky routes, instead sailing through the Middle East. Some ships are taking the long route around Africa through the Cape of Good Hope. The detour adds roughly 14 days to the journey. 14 extra days means more fuel, more wages for crew, and more operational costs. For a large vessel, that can mean around $1 million in additional fuel expenses. Container shipping rates have already climbed nearly 60% compared with last year. And those costs eventually travel down the supply chain. Construction projects become more expensive. Car manufacturers pay more parts. You already know about the LPG shortage in your local neighborhood. But there has been one small diplomatic breakthrough. India has been negotiating directly with Iran to reopen safe shipping corridors through the Strait of Hormuz. After these diplomatic engagements, a few Indian-backed LPG vessels have already managed to pass through the route. A small small sign that back-channel diplomacy is working, at least for now. So what are we seeing right now is something economists sometimes call an invisible tax. Nobody announces it, there is no new law, but the cost quietly appears everywhere, on packaging, construction materials, transport, eventually on your groceries. The world built a global economy that depends heavily on a new narrow shipping routes. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important. When that route becomes unstable, the price of everyday life slowly starts shifting, not overnight, but step by step. Some estimates suggest disruptions in this region could add around 0.7 percentage points to global inflation. Not a huge number, but enough to quietly squeeze household budgets across the world. And that brings us to a simple question. Have you noticed prices rising in everyday products around you recently? Because sometimes the biggest economic shocks don't start with dramatic headlines. They start with very small price tags changing quietly on store shelves. I think the information may compel you to think about what is happening around us, and for all such news, stay tuned to WantStats for the news that matters.